Hello everyone. Today we are talking about post-processing. Now, it's very important to remember that everybody has their own workflow and what works for them as far as post-processing. It's also important that I note that there are many different tools that you can use to process your raw images or your JPEGs, but your raw images. For the sake of this video, I'm going to be working in Lightroom Classic. That is by no means a support of them, an endorsement of Lightroom over anything else. You will find the tool that works for you. Generally, though, we're going to look at the editing in this just because Lightroom Classic is widely used, but also it does have different organizational tools built into it that we're going to talk about in our workflow. And we're going to look at, there's going to be various videos here. We're going to have this one where we're kind of just going to go over an overarching workflow just to show you what you can do. Then we're going to talk about post-processing objects and landscapes specifically. And then we will look at post-processing portraits, which we often approach from a very different way than landscapes. So we're going to get started. I have my Lightroom open and I have a SD card plugged into my SD reader with some new images on here that have not been imported just yet. So we're going to do this just from the beginning. Now you will notice that there are maybe some that I'm not going to bring in, some of these black ones here that maybe the shutter fired by mistake, something like that. So as these start to populate, I can go through and I can uncheck ones that I'm not going to want to waste my time on. And there we go. Those are not going to come in. And then I will let it load. Now I know just from looking at this that some of these pictures are going to be a little bit different than the others, so maybe I want to go ahead and already start tagging them. So these 4 images I took in the UK, so I want to just write that they're in the UK, in Margate, and it was over winter time. These are just some tags that I use, keywords. The rest of the images were taken not in the UK, but taken in the Netherlands, in Haarlem. It's still winter 2025. So just an example of some keywords. Obviously, you might have other keywords that are useful for you if you're doing a client shoot. Maybe you want the keywords to be the name of the client, anything like that. And again, I have some images that were probably accidental fires, so I can go ahead and uncheck those. I'm going to have to check them all again just because I changed my keywords. And I'll uncheck these. And any others that I see maybe that, were accidental fires or so forth. Okay. So I'm not going to wait for them all to populate. I'm going to go ahead and import these. They're organizing by date. And right now they're just going on my hard drive. That's because I had a hard drive failure yesterday and I'm still in the process of moving things around. So right now I'm just going to be putting them just in my pictures folder, and they're going to go into a folder by date. That's not normally where I store my images. That's just for the sake of right now. But you can see here's where you can change it. So for instance, if I wanted to instead put them in a different folder, this is where I want to do it. And look at all these misfires. I can go ahead and, I guess my camera was just going off in my bag. Wow, look at that. All right, so you see, everybody does it. I had my camera in my bag. It was probably on and just did a bunch of misfires. All right, let's import. Okay, so after we have our raw images imported, we can start doing our corrections. So again, your workflow depends on what works best for you. Some people like to crop first, some people like to do all the color toning and all of that before they crop, these sorts of things. For me, I prefer to do my color edits, do my toning, do my white balance, all of that before I straighten and crop, but you're going to see in the lesson below that it's also a very reasonable way to start by doing your cropping and your other corrections. So if I'm going to just go by the lesson today, we can start by doing some basic corrections to the image. So I'm going to choose this image here. And I'm going to start by going to my lens corrections. So you have certain options available for you. You can use profile corrections that are based on the camera and the lens that you used. So for me, I used an X100F, a Fujifilm, so it went ahead and it already did those corrections for me. So if you look closely, you're going to see that there's some bulbing right here. Look at the eye and watch what happens when I enable the corrections. Okay, so it changed the bend of the lens there, the distortion that is introduced by the lens. It kind of fixed that for me automatically. I do have some more control over that, as well as vignetting. So if there's some over vignetting from the lens, or you want to add some more, I can go ahead and do that here. In this case, I'm not going to touch that. So I'm just going to leave it at 101 as opposed to 100. Other options that I can do right now is I can straighten it, and I can go ahead and start doing those crops the way that I would want. So one option I have, I never like to have sharpening done in here. I'll sometimes do it on export. I don't usually do it here. The way this is a new library, and by default it imports with the sharpening. I forgot to change it before doing that import, but there you go. So if I want to go ahead and just do some transform, some straightening, corrections, I can do that now before getting into any of the exposure or color. So there are some automatic settings here. Watch what happens with this one, because this one's tricky. We have our horizon is here. We have a horizontal wall here. We have a vertical light stand, and we have a vertical tower. So if I do the full, I may or may not get that right. Okay, very slight. So what it actually did here was it just took the photo and it bended it a little bit in this side, a little bit closer to this side. So it did a horizontal transform, and it seems like it tucked up from the corner as well. One thing I can do to check my horizon is I can actually manually do it. When there's a lot of lines, sometimes that horizon isn't recognized as such, and I want it to be straight from the horizon, so I can just do that manually by going to the crop tool and clicking on this angle straighten tool. And when you do that, you get your little level, and you can just draw the line on the horizon, and it will do that for you. You do also have down here, again, this is just in Lightroom Classic, but whatever you're using might have something similar. You can do an auto level right here as well. I like guided as well, because what guided lets you do is it lets you to set multiple parameters. So I can set the horizon and the tower. Now the tower isn't the same, it tapers at the top, so I have to be careful to get that line where the line should be. And you see it kind of just pulled up from the corner, very similar to what it did on full. When you have this, you can do up to 4 lines. So if I wanted to get my wall also straight, and I just want to make sure maybe at the top of the tower is straight. Yeah, okay. So there we go. That's one option I have. So if you want to see what it looked like before, that was the straightening before I did any straightening or transforming, and this is after. So you can see that the horizon is straight, as well as some vertical lines are adjusted as well. Because obviously I am not the height of this tower, so I did not shoot it at eye level. I shot it at my eye level, not at the even field of the tower itself. So this kind of corrects for that. All right, so now that I have those things done, we want to kind of get into our white balance and our exposure adjustments, and then we can also talk about color and so on. So let's start with exposure. This image is quite dark because it was a quite dark sky, and I was exposing for the highlights. The sun was hitting the tower directly. So I was exposing for that because I didn't want to blow out the white tower. And everything else is pretty much in shadow. So if I want to kind of just work with that exposure a little bit, I can go ahead and bring it up a little. And you see without losing too much detail, but I'm filling in and bringing up the exposure on everything. Now my shadows are filled a little bit, but I might want to play with that a little bit more. Now, one thing that I think a lot of people like for working in exposure, instead of just playing with my exposure toggle, I can't think of the word, slider, using my exposure slider, I do have another option as well. So I'm just going to pop this back to 0 for a second, just to show you. And I'm going to come down to my tone curve. Now, you may have played with this a little bit. You may not fully have a whole understanding of how it works. So let's look at it. We have this histogram here. It mirrors our histogram above. We talked about the histogram in a previous lesson, so you should be seeing that probably this is a very dark image just by looking at the histogram, because all of the colors and bands are pushed all the way to the shadows, to the blacks side of the histogram. Now, the histogram down here actually counters and mirrors this line. So the bottom right-hand corner, those are our shadows. The bottom left-hand corner, those are our shadows, and then the top right, we got our highlights. So watch what happens if I just flip it. Okay, now we have a negative. So do you see how this is working? Where this is controlling our highlights, this is controlling our shadows. And when you flip it, you're getting the negative. Okay, so let's just go back to the way it was. A very common curve type is called an S-curve. And an S-curve is when you literally draw an S with the curve line. You work with the curve line by clicking on it and creating a spot, a point, and then you can drag that point around. Okay, if you have other points, those points stay still as you pull the other one. So now an S-curve is quite popular because it really is just like a contrast curve. You see how it's created like darker darks and brighter whites. I don't do a S-curve very often just because it doesn't really match my personal style. For me, what I like is I like kind of softer images and kind of softer shadows. So one thing that I often do is I'll pop a control point in the middle. And when I do that, if I'm going to be controlling over here in the shadows, it's only going to affect the shadows because you see this part will not move. I can pull this anywhere. And it's obviously sometimes it's going to pull just because of the extremity of it, but it's not moving at the same rate. Like if I did not have this S point here, it's going to pull the whole line up, right? So I put a control point in the middle just to give me a little bit more latitude of what I do. One thing I like to do is I like to kind of lift my shadows a little bit and pull them in, and they become lower contrast and kind of softer, flatter image. That's just a personal style. I still do feel like that this is a little bit underexposed and I would like some more light. So I could go ahead and play with my tone curve in order to do that. Or as you know, I can come up here and I can just lift the exposure overall across the board. One thing you'll also notice is that there are 3 color channels within your tone curve. I encourage you to play around with these and just see how they function. So here I'm in the blue. Watch what happens when I play with the shadows. If I pull the shadows up, they're filling with like a blue hue. So the shadows are becoming blue. You see that? And the highlights, what's the opposite? Yellow. Okay, so you really have a lot of control over this. Sometimes if I have a really, really black image, like it's a negative space where you just have a person against a black background, sometimes I'll like to fill those shadows with a little bit of a tint of a blue. And then I can pull it out the same way that I was before just to kind of soften that overall feel. But again, that's a personal preference, and there are other places where we can adjust the color tone of the shadows and the highlights. Okay, that's just one example. Same with the red here, red shadows, teal highlights, and then green shadows, magenta. Okay, so again, you can play with that. It helps you to get an idea of what you're working with, what these tone curves do. Very powerful. Really just play with them yourself, okay? And then you'll get a better idea. Okay, so now that we've played with our tone curves a little bit, there is one big thing that I actually tend to do before I even get to an exposure, and I kind of skipped over it this time, not on purpose. So we're going to circle back to it, and that is our white balance. We talked a lot about how white balance in raw images is completely adjustable. So you can put your white balance on whatever you want. If you're shooting raw, you can adjust it later. So a quick and easy way to do that is you come up here to your white balance, and you see this little eyedropper. Again, this is in Lightroom, but there will be similar options in other software. I can go ahead and I can find a target neutral color, one that should be neutral. Maybe right now it's a little yellow or a little blue, and I click it, and it's going to try to readjust for it. Now, you'll notice that sometimes it doesn't do exactly what you want. Good news is you have full control over it. This is too blue. That is not what it should look like. So I'm just going to try to adjust for that, and I feel like it's a little magenta, so I'm going to adjust that very slightly as well. Again, full control over this. So those are the basic first steps. Again, you can crop here. I haven't decided really what I want to do with this. I like the idea of this being centered, but I also like the one way, and I haven't decided exactly how I want to crop it, but I'm going to play with it like this for now. And again, because this is non-destructive editing, I can always go back and readjust for that. So you can do your crops. Now, after you have done all of that, this is going to be the big part of your editing. And this is going to be your basic adjustments, things that you get to have full creative control over, whether you want a lot of contrast or you don't, or you want your reds to be very red, or you'd rather them be more magenta. Here's where we can do all of that. So we're going to come back up to this section later, but right now we're going to go down to our color mixer. And our color mixer here, we have our HSL sliders, hue, saturation, luminance. We talked about these in our color theory lesson, so you should have some idea of what these things mean. Hopefully you have all idea of what these things mean, and we can adjust them accordingly. Now, in real life, I see or saw this is less orange and more red. I will tell you right now, red is the most difficult color to post-process. It catches out really easily. It becomes fragmented really easily. It's hard to get it exactly right. It takes a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of practice. But with the combination of hue, saturation, and luminance, you can get reds to be the red that you want. Just know that it's a little bit trickier than some of the other hues and other colors. So I'm going to start by the hue here. Now, this red isn't just red. This red is red, it's orange, and it's yellow. It's all kind of mixed in there. So any edits that I do to one of these sliders, it's going to affect everything else within that color tone range. Another option you have when you're working with a color, greens, this happens, greens are usually not just green, but also maybe yellow or also maybe blue. So instead of trying to guess, you can click on this little circle here. And what this does is it chooses the color that you click on, and it will adjust accordingly. So right now I'm in hue. I've clicked on the red. And if I drag down, you see how the red and orange color tones are moving? That's the two color tones that it's picking up in that spot of the image. So it's adjusting those two. I can do it like that, where I kind of adjust them to where I want them. And like I said, this was pretty red in my head, and not really pink or magenta, and not really orange, but more of a red. So I'm going to kind of get as close to it as I can. It was more of an orange red than a red, and people who have seen this in real life in person are like, what are you talking about? It's like orange. But I kind of see it closer to a red orange than anything else. So I have the hue roughly where I want it, but this is like the only color in the image as well. The letters are yellow, but this is really it. So I kind of want it to pop. I'm going to go ahead and do that, the same thing in the saturation. So I'm going to click on the red and I'm going to pull up. And you see when I pull up, it really starts to pump that saturation. When I pull down, it pulls it out. You want to have a gentle hand with this. I can tend to go overboard sometimes because I am a color fiend, but you know, it's your art, you do what you want. But if you do go overboard, you do start to introduce, you know, this white wall is now quite red, which is not looking great. And then maybe there's going to be some blown out bits of the red if I go too far. I think in this case, it's not bad. So I'm going to just pull it down a little bit. Okay, I think that looks good. And then the third one is luminance. Who remembers what luminance is? I can't hear you. Okay. So luminance, remember, is the light shining through the color. So in this case, with red specifically, if you start introducing luminance, you're going to end up with like pinks and oranges. You see that? If I want it to be like a rich red, I usually pull my luminance down a little bit. If you go too far, then you lose all the light and it just becomes dull and hard to see and so forth. So I'm going to kind of just, first of all, I'm going to just reset it so you can see it again. Put both of these back at 0. And I'm just going to pull that luminance down just a little bit to make it like a deeper red. And let's look at it before. Okay, not bad. I'm going to add a little bit more exposure. And one thing that I really want to do is the luminance of the white marble. Because the white marble has kind of some dingy yellows and oranges to it. I'm going to pull up the luminance a little bit just to bring out the brightness of it and the whiteness of it. And I think that helps. I can also maybe pull down saturation a little bit. And let's shift the hue a little bit towards the blue end to get rid of that yellow stain there. All right. Now the last thing that I might want to do with the color is that these letters, like I said, are actually like a really pretty yellow, but you're not really seeing that here. You're really just it kind of looks taupe. So I want my yellows back. I'm going to start with my hue. I want it to be yellow, kind of like a mustard yellow, dandelion yellow. But I can't really see it, so I'm going to up my saturation much better. And then let's bring some light behind it. That is much better. So I can really read those letters. They really pop there for me. And that's the basics of this color mixer here. Again, it's a really, really, really powerful tools. You can do other things in here as well, but this is just to give you a little bit of an introduction on how you can start to play with that. If you want to do all over adjustments similar to what we just saw here, here is vibrance. Is just gonna, whoof, yikes. Okay, so soft hand with vibrance. And saturation is also right here. Again, soft hand, unless you're going for that, which is okay. Personal preference. Okay, and then we also have some other texture, dehaze, clarity. Dehaze is actually quite good if, or in clarity, if you have like a reflection in a window that you're trying to like fill in so you can see it. That's a good option for that as well. But there we go. Those are just some basic adjustments to my color and my exposure. Okay, so now we can do some localized adjustments as well. So for example, like the sky is quite blue. Down here, maybe I want to brighten this a little bit. So I do have some different options for localized edits. Let's just play with it a little bit. Let's start by saying maybe I want to get rid of this pole here. I can use the remove tool, and there are 3 modes to that. There's remove, just get rid of it. You can use generative AI to fill it in or not. Then you have your heal tool. So what that does is this is really good for portraiture. So we'll see that in there a little bit. And then we have the clone tool. I'll just show you the clone tool. So I'm going to pick a point and paint it on. And you see what the clone tool does is it literally just lifts from where you started. I'm not sure why it didn't go with where I chose, but that's okay. So there we go. I'm not going to use that right now. That's not very useful, but I'm going to try this remove tool. And I want to get rid of this bowl. So let's go ahead and let's remove it. And I am allowing generative AI in here. What it's going to do is it's going to read the rest of the image and try to replace that. And we have this opacity option here, so I can just completely wipe it out. And then there are different options to choose from, variations depending. So I feel like that looks pretty good. I'm okay with that. There is also obviously this part of it, so maybe I can try removing that as well. Otherwise we can just ignore it. It's not really there. Let's see how it does. Yeah, that's not bad. I'm happy with that. Okay, great. So I've removed a couple things. That's using the remove tool. But let's get back to that idea of, you know, the sky and it's quite dark and this is quite dark. And we're going to go into masks. Now, masking, there's a lot of different options. You used to really just have like your brush and your gradient masks, but now it can actually detect the subject, the sky, and the background. So in theory, we know the subject is the tower. So I'm going to say detect subject. And it pretty much got it. I can remove from that a little bit. I can get rid of this if I want to. But for now, let's just say it's fine. Let's say I want that to stand out a little bit more. I can pull up the exposure on it a little bit. I can get those highlights so it's bright again a little bit, or I can fill it back in so it's more natural. And you see it's only adjusting that section. See, it's only adjusting there. Okay. Now let's go back and we are going to add another one. So now that we've done it once, it's automatically chosen the one that I want to do. If I want to add another mask, I click here and then I can choose. Let's do the sky. I don't love the sky. It's so gray and blue. I don't remember it looking like that. I remember it being quite a pretty day. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lift the colors there. And I feel like it's a little too blue. So maybe I want to change my color temp a little bit. Don't love the blueness. And then you can actually adjust the hue here. That's quite powerful. If you do use fine adjustments, it will be a little bit more subtle about it. You see that? It's moving very slightly. So that's a nice way to adjust just like the hue of a certain section. And then I can also obviously add or subtract my saturation. And I can add a color overlay. So if I wanted the sky to be, you know, like a pinkish sky, I could choose that and then change the strength of it as well. In this case, I don't really want to do any of that, although I kind of like, that greenish gray isn't bad. I don't hate that. I hate all of these. It's actually not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and choose like a yellowish hue. Yeah, that's okay. And that is this mask here. If I decide I don't want to use that mask anymore, I can literally just delete it. I can remove from it and so on. Okay, so I can delete the mask if I want. The other option we have is if you don't want them telling you what the subject is, what the sky is, whatever is, you can select objects where you literally just draw boxes and it will say, okay, you mean this object, you mean this object. You can paint it physically with a brush. One that I actually still use quite a bit is the linear gradient. So I'm going to do that for here, for the front. I just pop that gradient on. You can see that it starts to fall off at the end of the street there, and I can decide like what that strength of fallout off is. The red is what's going to be adjusted. So if I really want that one way to pop a little bit more, this is the best way for me to do that. I can pull those highlights up for just the road and the whites, right? Because the road is very white. I really kind of hate the sky. I'm going to just delete the sky mask. All right, let's do, maybe we do need a sky mask though, because that's so dark. So let's do that again. Let's select the sky. And let's just lift the exposure a little bit. I just want it a little more balanced. It feels not balanced to me. And I don't know. I don't love the blue, but I don't want it to be like gray either. So I'm just going to adjust the white balance like that. So it's like more dark, I guess. I hate that. That's crazy. That's not right. Okay. I feel like that's fine. All right. So those are some selective edits there. We also have the option of, this is for red eye. If you remember, if you're old like me and used to use digicams at the club, you would always have red eye. And then one more that we can look at is just the paintbrush. So again, I can just paint like a specific spot. Let's say like this shadow, because it doesn't really match the rest of it. I can change that and I can go ahead and try to adjust for it and stuff. You have to be careful with that. That's all. That looks terrible, so I'm going ahead and I'm going to delete that mask. All right, so let's move on to basically the last steps here. Remember, this is what our image looked like before. This is what it looks like now. It's not bad. It's not exactly where I want it, but I can keep going if I want to. So maybe the last things, let's say I'm happy with this. The last things that we can kind of do is we can add the sharpness. We could take away any kind of denoising that we need. We can, change that. So if I sharpen this up, you can see the difference. Let me just zoom in. Okay, so you see it kind of creates these little worm things. That's partially Fuji and partially over sharpening. So when you're over sharpening, it's going to be picking up every little edge there. So this is with 0 sharpening. Okay, and I can just bring it up a little bit just to kind of get more definition there. You do have control over your actual level of sharpness, the detail, the radius of the sharp. So you can do all of that as well. And then if there were some noise, you could go ahead and do a denoise. I don't think it's really necessary here, but if you did do like a high ISO dark settings shot, then that might be a huge helpful tool for you. So let's go ahead and let's just look at the before and after one more time. So here's before, dark, crooked, colors pretty dull. After, brighter, less crooked, maybe not perfectly uncrooked, colors a little bit more vibrant. I'm going to do one thing that's really bothering me is I feel like there isn't enough luminance in the red. So there we go. It was starting to look quite too flat for me, so I'm just readjusting that before and after. And that's it. So now if I have that and I'm happy with it, now is time to export this image. I'm going to go to File, Export, or Shift Command E on a Mac. And then what I can do is I can set up a folder where I'm going to put it. For me, what I tend to do is I tend to export my JPEGs, upload them. I usually just throw everything on Flickr and then put any kind of backup anywhere. But I don't tend to like store my JPEGs. Okay, so I'll put them up on Flickr and then that folder will get deleted. I always have my raw file, it's backed up, it's on a hard drive, and it's doubly backed up. So I can go back and get those JPEGs again or readjust it. My personal workflow is that when I'm looking for a specific image, for however long ago it was, is I tend to just pull it down from Flickr because it's easy for me to find it, especially when I add all those tags. So let's just say Lido. And then here's where I can adjust the size. By default, you can just do a full quality JPEG. If you need to resize it, let's say you're submitting it to somewhere and they want you to change the size of it, you can do that here. So you can limit it to a specific size. You can also resize it here by the pixel length or inch or centimeter. So if you're going to print it for a photo, for example, and you know what size your frame is, you can do that. A good one for sharing, I usually just like do 2048. 300 pixels per each is not necessary for anything that I am doing. I'm going to just change it to 72. So this is again a smaller version. This is not the full res version. If I want the full res version, I'm not going to do this. Okay, so if you need a smaller one for, let's say, uploading to the Discord, this is the way to do it. If you just want your full res version, don't resize to fit, okay? And then leave this as it is. This is your color space. sRGB is great for general stuff. If you are printing, ask them what their color space is, and you can go ahead and change it to that, because that will allow you to make sure that when it's printed, it looks the way that you want it to look. All right, so I feel good about that. Other things you can do in here is you can include all your metadata, or you can remove some of it. You can change your credentials here, who made this, and so forth. You can add a watermark. I have feelings about watermarks that I will not get into right now, but if you need one, if you want one, can't think of when you would need one. If you want one, this you can do here, okay? And you can edit different watermarks and come up with them. I'm not going to do that. And then after export, you can have it to show you where you saved it. I'll do that for now just to show you. So I'm going to export it. And you'll see your progress bar up here. All done. Opened it up. There's my final image. I can then go and upload that somewhere. All right, so that was just a quick, well, long-winded quick way to do your edits. We're going to look at editing portraits, and we're going to edit one more object or landscape in the next video. So I will see you there.